It probably started in the APA in the early 1970s. And at that time, the women's movement was in ascendancy and it tended to overshadow the gay rights issue. But the two seemed to meld as they went on. And, there was a time when I couldn't tell the difference between women's rights and gay rights because it involved the same people. The first time it came up, and I was a member of Council. This would have been 1975, because I remember that's when I made the resolution. I made the resolution that being gay was not a mental illness. It was characterological. And it passed the Council of Representatives. And that was the first issue that came up. I also said that with that the APA, if it passes this resolution, will also vote to continue research that demonstrates whatever the research demonstrates. Unbiased, open research. It was never done. Yeah. It was never done. But the resolution that I made in the Council did get adopted, and by a wide margin. I had absolutely no idea. In that era, the Leona Tyler principle was paramount, that the APA would never take a position publicly that wasn't supported by scientific evidence, that it had to be scientifically demonstrated. And we abided, the presidents in my era abided by the Leona Tyler principle. All of a sudden, things began to change as things became more political than scientific. The Leona Tyler principle, which was never withdrawn, disappeared. In fact, you can't even find it in the annals of the APA. If I didn't have it, it wouldn't exist as far as they're concerned. But no, I had no idea, none of us had any idea that we were talking about open dialogue, research, unbiased, and the gay rights movement in those days didn't have the kind of militancy it has now. I mean, now it's all or none. In the early years, it was more like, let's see what's happening. It started changing pretty drastically by the late 1980s. By the mid-1990s, the Leona Tyler principle was absolutely forgotten. That political stances seemed to override any scientific results. Cherry-picking results became the mode. And the gay rights movement sort of captured the APA. Yeah, it's very interesting the way it happened. The APA bent over backwards to be understanding and open. And it's understanding that it left an open door for people to rush in and use it for other than scientific purposes, for political purposes. It was preceded by a number of issues. It became part of the movement for what one might call diversity. You want to bring all underrepresented peoples into psychology. And this is a very lofty idea on the surface of it. But when it becomes a bias, if I had to choose now, I would see a need to form an organization that would recruit straight white males, which are underrepresented today in the APA. We developed a group of psychologists that numbered around 200 to 250 that rotated themselves through all the offices of the APA. When a rule was passed that you couldn't serve more than X number of sessions on consul or on a certain particular office, they would rotate. They would run for another office and then come back to consul. So for years, about 200 to 250 people were running the APA, and they were a very select, inbred group. They were ultra-liberal, and anything that wasn't ultra-liberal was anathema. So that things like questioning some of the statements about gay and lesbian rights was not being accepted. It became a civil rights issue rather than a scientific issue. Now, I believe in civil rights. I was very active in helping gays be accepted in the APA. To this day, I am not opposed to gay marriage. I know I differ with Narth on some of these issues, but nonetheless, my position is that the person is the one who decides what they want to do with their orientation. And if somebody decides to be gay, I respect that. If somebody wants to marry a same sex, I respect that. But I also respect the right to disagree. And that's not allowed. You only hear one side of the issue. The latest thing about whether or not reparative therapy works, the committee that considered this would not allow anyone on the committee, as we well know, that does reparative therapy. And this kind of bias prevails in the APA, all under the scientific aura. I think that I'm more comfortable where the APA is now than I was 5 years ago. It's softened a bit, but it still is not looking at the question openly. There's much more to go. I don't know what the future is because people are dropping their membership in APA. APA is shrinking. The income that they used to get from the special assessment is dried up. So the APA is going through some real changes at this point. What the future will be, I'm not sure. But the clinicians, for example, are disappointed in that the APA has not done for it what it should have been doing with all the millions of dollars they were collecting all those years. And then to find out that the assessment was not mandatory but voluntary and it was never admitted to be voluntary, there's a backlash. There have been several backlashes. The torture issue was huge in the APA. So the APA right now is a very troubled organization. What we need to do is have an open dialogue, no holds barred, and see where the research takes us. Right now, certain research does not get funded. The funding agencies cherry pick what they fund. If we have an open dialogue, we'll be much closer in the next 5 years to a resolution to all of this. But right now, we're in turmoil. If anything, the two sides have stiffened their positions. Yes, I have. It's a difficult therapy, and it's not huge in terms of numbers. But yes, have seen success, and this is why the stance that you can never change. Ronald Reagan said, "Never say never." It's absurd. All you have to do is find one exception, and it knocks down the never. Exactly. But yes, I've experienced more than one exception. I would try to, first of all, I would latch on to their determination. If they didn't have that determination, it was usually because of their background, their religion, whatever. And the gay movement says that's a bias. You should tell them to abandon their religion because their religion is telling them a falsehood. That's not respecting where the patient is. I would start where the patient is, and then I would go back into the various aspects that impinged upon their becoming gay. Childhood experiences. For example, I found that masculine appearing men who were seduced by an older person in their boyhood were more likely to succeed than boys who at 4 and 5 years old were wearing dresses. The point is that everybody who wanted to change didn't. I mean, we had failures.
Yeah.
Admittedly, we had failures. The recidivism along the way with some would be intense. But we experience the same thing in treating substance abuse and alcoholism. Falling off the wagon is part of the treatment. So we would persist as long as the patient wanted to proceed. And yeah, there are successes.
Great.
Because the APA has become politically correct. Political correctness rules, not science.
Yeah, so
Sorry to say.